Okay. So comparative approach. What do you do in comparative approach? You compare. Simple as that. You take two or more political concepts and you compare this with that, and you end up coming up with pros and cons. Now, comparing is something we humans are very used to do, very much used to doing, right? Because pretty much in everything in life, when we are offered options, we tend to compare pros and cons and to make decisions, right? Didn't you all sort of like compare the pros and cons of subjects before choosing these subjects for your A-level streams? Like you thought about is it score levels, you thought about like how difficult those subjects are, you thought whether it's actually going with your likings, you thought whether it really goes with the future, whatever you want to do in the future. You certainly thought what sort of a teacher teaches that subject in the school, right? It's one of the main priorities, right? So, and you compared pros and cons and you chose your subjects. Not only that, right? Even when you're like picking a meal, right? Even when you are sort of like choosing what to wear, right? Everything you have options available, and whenever you have options, you compare the options before making a choice, right? When was the last time you had like three options to choose from and you were like, just give me whatever? No, you normally think this, so this, you do a quick comparison in your head and you are like, okay, I'll have this, right? The humans do that. So we can apply this for political science as well, right? So these are another door to enter our mansion, as I was telling before, right? Comparing and sort of understanding what are the pros and cons of each and picking what's the best one. Okay, so you can compare various things like a political institute, political um, question, political scenario, political institute, anything. You can compare any of these things this way, and you can have an understanding, right? So, as you know, the behavioralists, the cool kids, right? Cool kids on the block. They came and they basically attacked philosophical approach completely. They beat up philosophical approach completely. Now they wanted to attack philosophical approach. No, they attack philosophical. Now they want to attack comparative approach also. So they were like sort of like looking at it from different angles. How do we really attack this approach? There's nothing to criticize. It's basically a comparison and picking up what's right and wrong. Now this runs way back, okay, like since the ancient Greek era, and they wanted to sort of like attack this approach, but they didn't know how to attack because you can't really criticize the way you criticize philosophical approach. There's nothing wrong with this approach. Humans do this all the time, comparing and picking up pros and cons and choosing the better option. So there's nothing to criticize when it comes to this approach, which sort of led these these behavioral approach people, behavioralists, to attack comparative approach in a different way. So they were like, okay, we can't really change what comparative approach is. So let's change what they compare. Let's change what they normally compare when they study, right? The content they compare. So during Aristotle's time, for a really long time, for like 2,400 years, people were comparing the traditional, like typical political stuff, right? Typical political stuff like states, governments. Political science was sort of founded based on one of these comparative approaches. Remember, one of the comparative studies. What founded political science? What took political science out? Aristotle's book Politics, which was a comparative study of 168 Greek city-states. Okay, so this way you can see that. Uh, this way you can actually see that. Basically, comparative approach have been comparing the very basic stuff of political science for a really long time. And the behaviorists were like, let's change this. Let's change what they compare. So they were like, just leave those traditional stuff aside. Let's compare what we brought into the subject. Like, there were several elements that the behavioralists introduced to the subject, like political behavior, political culture, political personalities, political socialization. Those stuff were brought up to political science by behavioralists because these are behavior related content, right? So they were like, let's compare these, shall we? So this is considered as like the second stage of comparative approach, where you compare behavior related elements. Understand? Okay, so we call that the 20th century comparative approach, but in reality, it's a behavioralist comparative approach. And you know what happened to the blonde cheerleader? She lost as the nerdy kid returned with a makeover and behaviorism went back. Then what happened was, then we sort of kept that aside and we were like, okay, now that behaviorism is not our priority anymore, let's change comparative approach again. So we have the contemporary comparative approach. Do you guys know what the meaning of the word contemporary? Because professor loves this word and it's going to be used quite a lot in the syllabus. Contemporary means current, present day, at the moment, sort of an idea, right? So contemporary comparative approach, the modern day comparative approach, what we have. So we are comparing stuff that are added to political science very recently, like feminism, human rights, conflict management. These things were added to political science very recently, and we comparatively study those, right? And of course, you need to know a couple of names, like there are a couple of interesting articles and important books that sort of like contributed to the development of comparative approach. That's all you need to know when it comes to comparative approach. Then multidisciplinary. You take multidisciplinary approach. What you need to know regarding that is the fact that basically multidisciplinary means multi-subjective, as I told you before, right? Multi-subjective approach. So multi-subjective means you study political science alongside other subjects. So in that approach, basically what you need to know, what are the subjects, what were the subjects that were most closely attached to political science throughout the history in different eras. What subjects were close to political science during the Greek era? What subjects were close to political science during the Roman era? What subjects were close during the 18th century, 19th century? What were close during the 20th century? So if you take the Greek era, stuff like philosophy, of course, it was a parent subject. That subject was close. During the Roman era, law became quite close to political science because Romans were the first people. Romans were the first people to actually start a proper legal system. Which is why if you are a law student in the future, the law faculty, you have to study Roman law as a subject, because that is the world's first subjectual, like the law framework, right? So it was close to political science. Then in the 19th century, with Karl Marx's contributions, economics became quite close to political science. 20th century with the sociological contributions, psychological contributions, those things, and the political novels and stuff being written, political movies coming out. So actually art and literature came quite close to political science. So those are the subjects that you need to be familiar. What subjects are close to political science in each era, then you're sorted. Okay. Right. So let's read that part and let's be familiar with that. Uh, let's get a student from this batch to read this part. Shensa, can you read the comparative approach and the multi-subjective approach for us? Are you okay with reading, or shall I get someone else?
Yes, sir.
Right, comparative approach.
Comparative approach. This also can be considered as one of the oldest approaches to study political science. This approach was initially followed by Greeks. Aristotle is considered as the pioneer of this approach, since he followed this approach to write the book Politics. This book comparatively studied 158 Greek city-states. Comparing in general means studying two or more elements by focusing on advantages and disadvantages. Therefore, the comparative approach can focus on a political problem, a political theory, a political phenomenon. In this approach, no solitary element is studied as studying includes two or more elements. This approach is based on the foundation that a complete comprehension only comes with a comparison. Example: In order to determine that which governance creates political stability, it is necessary to follow two or more different formats of governance, such as presidential, cabinet, etc. In order to determine the best representative method, it is necessary to compare different representative methods in different countries. In order to determine the best system of governance for peace, it is necessary to study different formats of governance that are followed by countries with conflicts. The book Foundation of Comparative Politics by Kenneth Newton and Jan van Deth points out two reasons for the necessity of studying politics comparatively: the importance of understanding politics in other countries in order to understand politics in our own country. The difficulty to obtain a proper understanding of politics in a country without a comparative study of political histories, backgrounds, and institutions in several countries. There are three main eras of comparative approach: classical comparative approach, 20th century comparative approach, behavioralism, contemporary comparative approach. Classical comparative approach to studying politics. This is the initial stage of comparative approach, which was followed by Aristotle and other philosophers in Greek and medieval eras. During this era, this approach was mainly used to study governance. Aristotle followed this approach to compare Greek city governments based on the facts of the number of members, corruption level, etc. 20th century comparative approach to study politics. This approach was developed in the 1950s and 60s with the contribution of American political scientists. Especially the development of behavioralism created the foundation for this approach. Although the classical comparative approach focused on governments and other political phenomena, this era of comparative studies provided that political comparisons should be based on human behavioral patterns similar to natural sciences. This included many new areas to political science, such as political development, political change, political culture, political socialization, and political behavior. The following are a few works that played a pioneering role in introducing the comparative political science inquiry. Comparative Political Systems, 1956, The Journal of Politics, Volume 18, Number 3, by Gabriel A. Arman. The Politics of the Developing Areas, 1960, by Gabriel A. Arman and James S. Coleman. The Social Basis of Politics, Political Man, 1960, by Samuel Martin Lipset. The Civic Culture, Politics, Attitudes, and Democracy in Fine Nations, 1963, by Gabriel A. Ahmed and Sidney Berger. Political Order in Changing Societies, 1960, by Samuel P. Huntington. Contemporary comparative approach. Currently, the comparative approach has progressed even further to focus on many new areas such as political institutions, political processes, political transformation, political conflicts, social political conflicts, peace processes, citizen activities, ethnic politics, civil society politics, human rights, and political participation of women. Contemporary comparative method further provides that the measurements from ideal models on political developments are not necessary, as their focus is based on providing solid political interpretations. Therefore, it can be seen that the different eras have changed the content of the comparative approach rather than changing any format of the approach itself.
Okay, thanks. Now you can see this is John Van Deth, one of the pioneers of comparative politics. We saw that John Van Deth and Kenneth Newton are considered as one of the two of the most important political scientists who contributed to the development of comparative politics. And this is John Van Deth, and this is a book he wrote, Foundation of Comparative Politics. Right. Then there's multidisciplinary approach. Nice, a small correction. Right. Uh, who would like to read that? Isaiah, how do I pronounce your name? Isaiah or Isaiah?
It's easier.
Isaiah, okay.
Yes.
Yes. Isaiah, please read multidisciplinary approach for us.
Okay. Multidisciplinary approach. The element of politics is not isolated from other social elements in society. It is not possible to draw lines and separate politics from economic, social, cultural, and religious elements. Therefore, studying political science requires connecting political science to other subjects. This approach is based on learning politics on a multi subjective path. The historical development of political science reflects the fact that it has been contributed by many other important subjects throughout history. Greek era philosophy, Roman era divinity, history of law, 19th century economics, law and history, 20th century social science, psychology, anthropology, art and literature.
Okay, pause. If you have the
Okay.
printed note in hand, please highlight this part. Or if you don't have the printed note, uh, write this down. Okay, this is very. Don't take a screenshot because I know you will never look at it again. Okay, not that I am new to doing exams or not that I am new to doing online classes. You take screenshots and you never look at them again. You go get recordings, class recordings. You never listen to them again. I know. Okay, so write it down. If you have the printed note, highlight it. Philosophy, divinity, history, and law in the Roman era. 19th century economics, law, and history. Now, you can see Greek era, it's philosophy because philosophy was the parent subject, right? So it had very close roots to philosophy. Roman era, of course, law comes because, as I told you, they were the first group of people to have a proper legal system. So political science had a connection with law back then. And of course, history, because Greek era was where that political science became a part of, became a subject, and by the Roman era, Greek era was history, right? So technically, studying political science was like an indirect study of history back then. Then, of course, divinity. There was a theory called the divine theory of the state that suggested that the state was created by God and the ruler was put in charge by God, which sort of like told the people that the king is like chosen by God. Like God created state and God put this person in charge. So you better listen to this person. If you disobey this person, that's disobeying God. So that's what helped them very effectively govern the people during the Roman era and the medieval era. So because of that, divinity became a part of political science as well. Then the 19th century, economics played a big part, especially because of Karl Marx's contributions in socialism, as well as Adam Smith's contribution in capitalism and the rise of liberalism and all that. Then, of course, law is connected to politics in the 19th century with concepts like rule of law, separation of powers, these concepts, checks and balances, constitutions, these things becoming more and more common in the 19th century. So law became a part of it. Then, of course, studying history, it has always been a part of political science, and which is why it was close in the 19th century as well. Especially with especially with Karl Marx and all, his writings refer to the history quite a lot. So that comes with political science, and of course, the 20th century, in the last century, of course, the social science became something close. Sociology became a part of political science. Then psychology, people's thinking, especially psychology, became important with behavioralists. They talked about human behavior. Anthropology is a secondary subject that is created. That's like anthropology is like the child political science and sociology had together. It's a secondary subject, and art and literature became a part of it because how these political dramas and stage dramas and movies, books, music, these things started influencing politics during the latter part of the 20th century. Hence, art and literature became a part of political science as well. Okay, so remember this. This is like the key point that you would get marks if you ever get to write an answer on multidisciplinary approach. Okay, this is the most important part. Okay, Izia, please continue.
It is not possible to study politics excluding other social elements since it is originated in a society and functions with many more social processes. This approach believes that a complete study of politics can only be done through a multidisciplinary study. This includes the concepts, methods of other social sciences. The importance of a multidisciplinary method was also emphasized by behaviorism. This included social sciences as well as natural sciences. Applying sociological and anthropological methods to examine the connection between voting and the caste system, applying psychological and biological methods to examine the reasons behind the human political behavior. In conclusion, the main fundamentals behind the multidisciplinary approach are as follows. The connection between politics and other social elements, despite studying politics being an independent subject, political theories and concepts being enriched with other theories and concepts of other social sciences, method political science being enriched with the contributions of other subjects.
Right. So I believe those two approaches also are properly explained, and you should know that well enough. Okay. Now, yesterday in my revision class, I gave a small activity. Okay. I gave a small activity to my 2021 students, and I'm going to assign it to you all as well now, right? There is a small table here, philosophical approach and scientific approach. So you need to draw a table like this. And if you have the printed note, you can write it here itself. If you don't have it, just draw this table on a separate piece of paper and then write it. So write the direct differences between philosophical approach and scientific approach, right? These people go with the fundamental questions. These people go with accurate facts. These people use normative goals. These people come up with conclusive answers. The philosophical approach suggests like a hypothetical perfection. Scientific approach acknowledges the problem, right? Stuff like that. So I don't want to spoon feed it to you. You are supposed to go through those two approaches and write a small short note here explaining how different these two things are, right? So before 12 o'clock tomorrow night, I want you all to send me a picture on WhatsApp, send me a DM of this table, okay? 12 o'clock tomorrow, Monday, 12 o'clock before that, right? So you are supposed to study philosophical approach and scientific approach. Meanwhile, study the other two approaches as well. And then you should be thorough with it. You should be able to write an answer, okay? Any questions, guys? No, right? I think this is pretty clear. I made it like clearer as the day. Okay. This is I normally in my textbook also I mentioned these are extended notes. So basically I have extended it. I have basically included everything that needs to be said about these topics. Okay. So it should be good enough. So in your study, if you all have questions, just let me know. Okay.